Hello, thank you everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Welcome to the education information session of the Churchill Trust. The Churchill Trust runs and administers Churchill Fellowships. We'll give it a moment or two for people to join. If you'd like, you can feel free to pop any questions you have in the Q&A section of this webinar. And you may want to also check the FAQ section of the Churchill Trust website, which has plenty of answers to questions that people have asked in previous years. That website is churchilltrust.com.au. We've popped a link in the FAQ section for you. Oh, sorry, it's in the chat, that link. We'll just give it a moment more. Okay, we might get started. I want to introduce myself. My name's Tom Nightingale. I'm the Media and Marketing Manager at the Churchill Trust. And yeah, thank you for coming along. It's great to have really great registration numbers for this event. So we're really looking forward to sharing some information with you. I want to acknowledge that I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, which is a place where knowledge has been shared for tens of thousands of years. I want to acknowledge my respect for elders past and present and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. And of course, people are coming from areas across Australia with all kinds of different traditional owners of those particular areas as well. Bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded and it will be sent afterwards, likely tomorrow, to everyone who's registered. Which means that you can share it with others if you like, but the recording will be available. It'll also be on the YouTube channel of the Churchill Trust. There are closed captions available for those who would find them beneficial. Just briefly, the format we've got for you tonight involves around 30 minutes of presentations and information, and then hopefully 30 minutes for your questions and for discussion. Tonight we will hear from Dacey, who's the CEO of the Churchill Trust, and she'll share some information about fellowships and the application process and what it all involves. We've also got two quite amazing Churchill Fellows who've been through the journey, who can tell you about their stories. Two different stories, but two quite, hopefully quite good stories for you to hear about what it's like to go on a Churchill Fellowship. We do invite questions. You can pop them in the Q&A section at any time. We will try and get to as many as we can in the time we have available after the presentations. With that, I'll hand over to Dacey. So Christine is, as I mentioned, the CEO of the Churchill Trust. She joined late last year. Christine's background is that she has decades as a senior public servant in the Commonwealth Government. She worked in aviation, infrastructure, immigration, education, youth affairs, and superannuation, among other areas. So Christine, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Welcome as well. I think Tom did a really lovely acknowledgement of country, and I would very much like to associate myself with those comments and acknowledge all of the people around our great country who are joining us from various other lands owned by First Nations. I would like to also just let you know that the Trust is really committed to a strong First Nations participation in our fellowships. So, as Tom said, we're really keen to keep this, pretty short, sharp and shiny and just give you the information that you need. Please do feel free to ask questions. And as Tom mentioned, the FAQs on our website really do cover a lot of ground. So please don't worry if we don't get to everything tonight. We will try and focus on the more broadly based questions, as people tend to kind of get more into thinking about whether they'll apply. Their questions tend to narrow down a bit, but tonight it's about giving the most information that we can to the most number of people. All right, I'm really not going to bore you to death with slides, I promise. So we will just run you through some of the basics. I guess the first and foremost is about Sir Winston. He left an extraordinary legacy in the form of Churchill Fellowships, and as a leader, he deeply believed in the power of public service and the capacity of individuals to create change. When he passed away in 1965, and it's the 60th anniversary this year, there was a huge national fundraising campaign to honour him through the creation of a living legacy, and the result, of course, are the fellowships. That public fundraising raised over £2 million, which is a lot of money 60 years ago, so much so that the banks had to open on a Sunday. Today, we're really pleased as the Trust to say that that extraordinary generosity continues to support Churchill Fellows, enabling them to travel the world and bring back ideas that really benefit the whole country. What is it? Well, we like to think of it as a really prestigious, life-changing learning opportunity. It's open to all Australians and permanent residents from all backgrounds. We do think it's much broader than an academic qualification or scholarship, and it's more than a grant. It's about your vision and your journey of learning and contribution. Fellows travel overseas for 4 to 8 weeks to learn new skills, observe best practices, and build networks that benefit their industry or their community back in Australia. It's a really wide-ranging, open process where topics can be basically whatever you tell us they are. There are no limits, and each fellowship really is tailored to your individual passion and purpose. I guess really importantly from our perspective, the fellowship's also open access. You get time with decision makers, people of influence, networks of people that, you know, perhaps you might not otherwise get to. Okay, and we also very much stress that when you're back, you become part of our alumni with its own network and its own opportunities. And we would really love for you to do that. And then you would join, you know, 4,800 Australians who've had that opportunity to do so since 1965. Here's some of the nuts and bolts about applying for a fellowship. It is open to all Australians and permanent residents who are 18 and over, and there isn't an upper age limit. If you have a disability or live remotely, we do offer additional travel support, including virtual and hybrid options, or domestic travel for very specific circumstances, but it is an international focus, and more information about all of these options are available on the website. What sort of project? It's an individual project. It's not a team project. However, we do welcome joint applications between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians if the project is focused on First Nations projects. Your project has to be self-contained. It has to benefit the Australian community, and it has to demonstrate that the topic has been fully explored within Australia first. As I said before, it's not just a trip overseas. It's an investment in you, your expertise, and your ability to make an impact. Some top tips for you. The assessment panels will get a lot of applications. We usually get about 1,000 a year. So it's important to make your project stand out. Some of the things that we really do look for is what's the need and why is your project so important now? Who will it benefit? How will it help? Be really as specific as you can be. In terms of where you go, we want to see you thinking and telling the panel about where you want to go and that it's achievable. People tend to get quite excited, and so we ask you to really think carefully when you're putting together what an itinerary might look like. And why you? What makes you the right person to deliver on this idea at this time? Please do yourself a favour. Don't talk in jargon. Be really clear, really concise and specific. And focus on how you will show to the panel that you are making meaningful change through this fellowship. We are going to do Q&As later, as Tom indicated, but we're going to try and get out ahead of that and just tell you a handful that we get asked all the time. How much is a fellowship worth? Look, the amount varies based on how long the travel is. But I can tell you last year, the average amount was about $35,000, and the feedback we get from fellows is that is satisfactory to cover their travel needs. What sort of expenses do we cover? It funds all your travel, all your accommodation and your meals and other fees that are approved that are part of your application. One of the questions we get a lot is, do I have to apply under a certain stream? And the answer is, you can apply under whatever category you want on the application form. There'll be categories, But don't be hung up on that, because the selection panels will sift through and some topics cover multiple streams. So just you put down what you think is the most logical place, but don't worry that if you click the wrong box, it'll somehow knock you out. And I guess last but not least, we get asked a lot of questions about managing your life while you're planning and traveling and then coming back and writing your report. And so part of this session tonight, and I think when you hear from our fellows, you'll really get a sense of, you've got to make a decision up front about, is this the right time in my life to do it? It requires, you know, a lot of time and dedication, not just for the travel, but for that prep and report writing. So we really encourage you to think about your personal and work commitments to make sure that you can make the most of the opportunity. That all said, we would love for you to give it a go. And the key dates are applications open on the 28th of February and close on 1 May. Interviews happen around May, July, and announcements in September. Period of travel from November later this year through to January 2027. So, you know, for us, those are the highlights, and we would really love to hear your questions after you've had a chance to talk to and hear from some of our fellows. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Christine. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, I want to just share with you some information. There are some Churchill Fellowships that are kind of general in nature, where there's, you know, any range of topics and ideas. There are some that are dedicated for specific categories, and these are what we call sponsored fellowships. So there are a few dozen of these, and the details are on the Churchill Trust website. But as an example, there's one that I'll mention tonight. It's called the Frank and Helen Zobeck Churchill Fellowship. And this is for projects that create equitable education opportunities for women. So this is a relatively new one. The first time we awarded it was actually last year. And the story behind it is that Frank and Helen Zobeck were migrants from Croatia to Australia. So when they arrived, which was back in the 50s, 60s, Frank worked multiple jobs by day, and he had to study at night to get his qualification overseas recognised within Australia. Anyway, if you fast forward a few decades, they have 3 grandchildren, one of who was someone called Katrina Marson, who herself in 2018 was awarded a Churchill Fellowship. And that was into studying best practice in preventing sexual violence through youth education. And that Churchill Fellowship then led Frank and Helen Zobeck to the establishment of the Frank and Helen Zobeck Churchill Fellowship, which is available for that purpose that I mentioned earlier. Look, I'll turn now to introducing our first speaker, who is Anne Gigney. Anne's been working as a training provider in the distilling industry since 2015. When she started, there was no kind of formal pathway for learning within that industry. She completed a workforce assessment for the Tasmanian industry in 2015, and she visited the Irish Whisky Academy and then brought home the concept of an introductory course to help people along the path to opening a distillery. Now, she's supported more than 1,000 Australian and New Zealand distillers on their journey to open a distillery or work in one. And in 2023, Anne was awarded a Churchill Fellowship to investigate best practice distilling training to apply to Australia via in-house or other models. So take it away, Anne.
Thanks, Tom. And look, thank you for reminding me what my project was called. So really happy about that. So certainly, look, the opportunity of undertaking a Churchill Fellowship was just ridiculously exciting. So, if you are thinking about doing it, then, obviously I can't say enough about it. That said, when I started, or before I applied, there were a couple of things that I thought about. Perhaps you might think about these as barriers. And they were things like, would my project actually be good enough? So, and valuable for the industry. And I think it's probably a tough one to answer, and I'll talk about that in a sec. The second question I was asking myself is now the right time? And that has been talked about a lot, but it is an important question, I think, to ask yourself as well. And the other one for me was that I'm not an academic. And I wanted, having had a look at some of the other projects that folks had undertaken previously, amazing people in the medical profession doing Churchill Fellowships, the same thing with science and those folks doing fellowships. So I thought to myself, can I produce something, a project that actually is going to be good enough to be considered? So when I started on the journey, I had a look at what some other folks had done, and one of those people was Nick Haddo, who was amongst other things, a cheesemaker. Actually, a cheesemaker doesn't quite do Nick justice. He's an amazing, dynamic tourism dude here in Tassie who happens to own Bruny Island Cheese and also have a brewery. So Nick and some other people certainly had inspired me to think that perhaps there might be something that I could offer. So when I was thinking, is my project good enough? Is it valuable enough? I'd been working in the distilling industry for close to 10 years, and through that time had been able to help close to 1,000 people on their journey to either start a distillery or to become more technical in the distilling industry. So when I thought about perhaps what else I could learn, there was probably something there that was valuable. And is the right time, really important point from the time in your life, but also the time is the right time. Is it the right time for that project for the industry? So that was something else that I had certainly thought about. And then I just backed myself. So in terms of, am I an academic? Am I going to be up against some really amazing people? For sure, but, back myself. And then the process of creating the application, looking at where I would go, looking at what the premise of the project would be, distilling best practice. Why do we need it? What difference could it make? What are the places that I would go to in the world that I might be able to learn something new and then bring that back to Australia? So that's the process I went through. And all of this, of course, in the couple of weeks or months before the applications opened. And then actually going through the process of applying. So amazingly, I was told in July I was shortlisted and then advised in September, October that I had received the fellowship. And then it was an incredible whirlwind of, I'm just looking at my notes here, 7 countries and 12 businesses, 23 different people, 6 weeks. And just an incredible experience that sticks with you, and the people that you meet and the experiences you have and the knowledge, of course, that you gain to bring back to your community that, that knowledge. So, and I think the other thing is, if you are choosing to go on the journey, my first piece of advice is do it. If you've got a project that's good enough, do the work, get some people behind you, get some great people to cheer and support for you in that application. But then really, really enjoy the experience of being on your fellowship and the people you meet and the experiences you have and the generosity of the various hosts. Becoming part of a global community, all of that's quite incredible. So I think that's probably my 5 or so minute summary. Tom, I'll throw back to you, but certainly happy to have some questions when we get there.
Thank you very much, Anne. And yes, just a reminder that please pop your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll get to as many as we can in the time we have. But I would love to introduce our next speaker for you. This is Liana McCurry. Now, Liana was awarded the Public Education Essays Primary School Teacher of the Year in 2021. And that was for her work in teaching maths. She was also a finalist in the 2022 South Australian Premier's Excellence Awards. And she was, after that, she was invited to present at a Sharing Best Practice conference about her approach to teaching maths in primary school classrooms. So Liana was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2022, and that was to study best practice in teaching mathematics that provide best outcomes for all students. So Liana, great to have you here, and over to you.
Thank you. Okay. I'd like to welcome you all. I am coming to you from Ghana country in Adelaide, South Australia. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, first of all, for joining, because you're in the really exciting stage right now, which is possibilities. You know, there's so many possibilities about what you could do, what you could tackle. So in coming into this webinar, I guess for me, I just want to give you a bit about myself, but I was also really, really lucky because I actually had a friend who had done a Churchill Fellowship, and I was able to sit with her. I remember sitting with her for about 3 hours, asking her every question I could think of. And so I approached this webinar thinking, okay, what did I ask her? What are the key things that I wanted to know going into this process? So first of all, about me. So I've been a teacher for close on 20 years now. And I've been an assistant principal for the last 2 years. And then because of all of this work and because of the Churchill Fellowship, I've actually resigned from the Department for Education at the end of last year and have started my own maths consulting business this year. So it's all very exciting. But yes, as Tom mentioned, so my project was investigating best practices in primary school mathematics for best outcomes for all students. So I visited Singapore, Japan, Finland, Estonia, Canada. I went to Vancouver and Hawaii in the US. And I did 6 countries in 7 weeks. I would say not the best idea. I would probably go a bit narrower, but you know, that's all right. We do what we think is best at the time. So why did I apply? I had done a lot of training here in Australia. I had visited Bentley West, which is a key school in Victoria, and I just sort of thought I'd done a master's degree in mathematics education, and I was like, well, what are these? We're not doing so great as a country in Australia with our mathematics results. We are declining. So what are these other countries doing that keep them consistently high performing? So that was the basis of my investigation. And then I thought, well, what data do I use? So I used the PISA assessments to decide which countries I would go to and why. So I would say, first of all, if you think it's a paid holiday, you are sorely mistaken. It is a lot of work. So the project itself, I would say, be very, very clear about what you want to do and where you want to go. So when you write that application, you need to have that all nutted out and all really detailed and explained in your own head, and to explain in your application, and then if you're fortunate enough to get to interview. So where do you want to go? Why do you want to go there? Keep it really focused. I think mine was I think I just went to too many places. It was a lot of travel. And if I had my time again, I would have done less places, stayed a bit longer in those places and been a bit narrower. Understand that you need to organize everything. So if you are going to take this on, you organize all of your meetings, you organize all your accommodation, and it's a lot to do. And what one thing that I really, really loved about my experience was the Churchill Trust actually give you a mentor to work with. And I'm very fortunate my mentor is here on the webinar with us this evening as well. Hello, Peter. That was really, really beneficial. Just having someone who'd had the experience that you could talk to, ask questions, ask them what they did in particular places. So those conversations were so valuable, and it was such a great aspect of my fellowship. So I would say you have to really think about, spend your time thinking about what sets your project apart. So I went to the Churchill page, I looked up all of previous Churchill Fellowships done around mathematics education. So you've got to think about what similar projects have been done before, what sets you apart. And I would say the biggest thing is think about your impact. So why is this project needed? What is the impact that this project will have in your field once you return? That's probably the biggest advice that I can give. Writing the report is a huge task. And as Anna said, you know, when you're not an academic, you know, we don't write reports, that can be really, really daunting. And whilst I was away on my fellowship as well, there was one of the Churchill Fellows who was doing literacy education, who I do know actually, she released her report, and it was this just like incredible massive academic paper that was like 100 pages, and I just felt like I got imposter syndrome just massively, thinking, oh my goodness, I cannot do this, I'm freaking out. But then I remembered, like, this is my experience and I have to do it as I see fit. So, you know, some people will say that they got a lot of their report done whilst they're away. I think for me, I went into my fellowship thinking one thing and thinking about what I would get out of it. But during my actual fellowship, my ideas changed, and my ideas about what I wanted to share and report on changed as well. So for me personally, I actually spent my time on my fellowship setting up my report, so the format of like what I wanted it to look like and things like that. And I actually found that really helpful when I came back. But it is a big undertaking when you get back to do that report as well. So I would say as well, if you're on the fence, just apply. I actually wasn't successful my first time round. I had to apply twice, and then I was successful my second time. So it's a incredible opportunity, and I think this is the exciting time, because yeah, it is the possibilities. You know, what could you do, what impact could you have? And as Anna said, it is a whirlwind and it is absolutely life-changing, and I would highly recommend it to anybody that wishes to give it a go. So that's all from me, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Liana. We're going to go to questions now. I've got plenty of questions, so yeah, keep them coming in if you have a question. But the first question we have is around the people or the organisations that you want to learn from internationally. So, Christine, this question might be for you, but question is, how much detail is needed about those people or those organisations at the application stage, and do you need to have contacted them? Do you need some sort of confirmation that they will meet with you, that they will work with you?
Look, I think what the panel is looking for when they get your application is a really strong sense of you knowing who you want to talk to, what countries those people are in, what organisations they are, and what's the rationale for talking to them. We completely accept that every detail will not be nailed down. And, you know, Anna and Liana have very strong views about how you can think you're going down one direction, then all of a sudden, you know, oh, Tom goes, oh, no, you really need to go and talk to Muriel over there. So, you know, we need a credible, robust outline from you, but we won't hold you to every semicolon and dot point at the time of application. Is that a fair description, ladies?
Okay. Next question goes to the referees. So can we outline what makes a good personal referee versus a professional referee? And following on from that, is it better to choose someone who knows you well, or someone who's senior to you or knows the topic well, or kind of a mix of all of them? So yeah, what would we, Christine?
Well, maybe our fellows can tell us, who did you use as referees?
Anne, maybe you first.
I'll just unmute myself there. Yeah, look, that's such a good question. I was a little bit lucky, because when I started doing the distilling training, which felt like 400 years ago, about 10 years ago, I was doing some work with a fellow who was the MD of Sullivan's Cove Distillery. And that's Patrick Maguire. And one of the things about Patrick is that he was always very supportive of the concept of building a distilling training ecosystem around the industry. So for me, actually, it was a little bit of a no-brainer as to how I kind of went about that. Patrick was my number one choice, and the other was a fellow friend of mine who worked in the education industry and knew what I was doing. So in some ways, I think maybe I was a little bit lucky. It'd be interesting to hear what Liana, what process she went through to identify hers.
Sure, I can jump in here. So I agree. I think I was probably very lucky as well. So for me, I had my current school principal who was incredibly supportive of everything I was doing in the classroom. So that was great. And then I had a teacher friend that I had worked with and I had also known for a long time. So she was able to talk about my personal self, but also with a lens of having worked with me professionally. So like Anne, I think, yeah, I was very lucky in my supportive people.
And I guess, you know, generally, you know, pick the referees who are going to be able to talk to, you know, your passion for the project, what sort of person you are, that you've got the resilience to do it, and the commitment to kind of giving back when you get back. So I think only you will know is the answer, which is slightly unhelpful, but accurate.
Okay, the next question is something we get across all types of sectors, no matter what sort of people have in their lives. But in this case, this person's a teacher and they've asked, sorry, the chat's run away from me, but it basically asked, how did you persuade your school, Liana, to let you travel for so long during the year? So this does apply to, I'm sure many fellows deal with this in their professional and personal lives, but maybe Liana and Anne, you could share how you work through that sort of, I suppose, tension as you're planning something like this.
Sure. Do you want me to go first, Anne? I'll jump in. So I had a really interesting one as well, because I applied whilst I was at one school and then I won a leadership job at another school and then was awarded the fellowship. So I then had to turn to my new principal and say, hey, I have 7 weeks off. So that was interesting, but she was very supportive, so it was all good. I used like 2 weeks of my holiday, and I actually used a combination of long service leave and leave without pay to go. Unfortunately, the process for the Department for Education is really rigorous, and they wanted to know if it was to be supported by the department. I had to fill in forms so that they knew where I was every hour of every day, and I couldn't provide that information because I didn't know how long I would be at school. So unfortunately, I ended up having to use personal leave. However, in saying that, I do know a previous fellow who was able to have hers supported through the Department for Education here.
Yes, and I think certainly my experience was not dissimilar. I had to use, I think, 2 weeks paid leave, and I think I took 4 weeks leave without pay. So the fellowship arguably offset my income while I was away. So that's probably not the ideal scenario if you can avoid doing that, because the amount that is provided if you are successful is really about supporting your travel and your accommodation and your costs overseas. So you really probably don't want to be in the situation that I was in of using that to offset a lack of income. So yeah, not the best way to go about it, but that's certainly how I got around it.
And that's a really good point. Like when we talk about, is this the right time? Have a chat to your employer, because the fellowship is not about a wage replacement, and we really are pretty firm about that. And so we do say to people, talk to your boss, think about what's going on with your leave balances, think about who can help look after the kids, all of those kind of really important things before you get all very excited and then kind of go, oh, well, how would this work in practice?
Yes, and I think for me, Christine, because I was working part-time for the government and I was working part-time for 2 distilling companies, arguably both mine, but still, balancing that, that's how I was able to actually make it work, because it was only a few days for the government, which I took leave for, and the other was essentially me backing myself in my company. So yeah, kind of worked, kind of didn't work, but nonetheless, it worked. Yeah,
It's life, right? Life's
that's right.
messy and rich for everyone.
Yeah.
Well said. Okay, well, on that theme, we've got a couple of questions coming through around the impact of fellowships that people refer to when they're applying. And some of the questions, multiple questions, are asking things like, does it have to be a nationwide impact that you're proposing, or can it be kind of more discrete within a geographic area or a single state or territory. And then there's another sort of similar question around what sort of sources or evidence-based material you might need to use to demonstrate the value of that impact in the application process. So I suppose the questions really go to how do you persuade the panel of the potential impact? Christine, do you want to talk to that first up?
Sure. So look, the answer is it absolutely doesn't have to cover the whole of Australia. We talk about the impact on communities, plural, so it might be in a state, it might be in a postcode, it might be in a group of people with a specific interest. So no, you don't have to cover the whole of Australia. And it's not a contest about whose impact is the biggest. It really isn't. It's about the totality of what you're proposing to look at. And the uniqueness of it, and has it been looked at before? It doesn't, has something changed in the world around you? So, and the other thing I would say, just in terms of references and then framing up your application, this is not an academic process, and we are determined as much as we can to encourage people who aren't necessarily academics to apply. So if you've got lots of footnotes and references, have at it. But that's not what it's about. It's about conveying your passion and purpose in your application. And the panel's going to be reading a lot of applications, right? This is a really competitive process. So think about, does adding in 10 pages of footnote make your application more or less competitive? It may not. It's kind of up to you how you want to present that. Ladies, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Christine, I wouldn't mind talking about that process of pulling together the application, because I don't know if Liana had the same experience, but I always wanted to put my best foot forward, and I think it's certainly an important thing to do, is that if you are going to put in an application, do the work to put your best foot forward. And for me, that looked like talking to as many people as I could find in the distilling industry or brewing industry that had done something similar, and find out what their experience was like. So I spoke to probably 2 or 3 people in the industry. I then thought very deeply about what I could be researching. So what I could be asking people, what would I be able to bring that perhaps is not being done already, or is not going to be serviced by things that are already happening in the industry? And then if I were choosing places to go, where would I choose places that have experiences or knowledge to Australia? And where could I possibly go that might be really different from the experiences in Australia? And then what I did is I kind of stuck them all together like a little bit of a jigsaw to get to the point where I could say confidently that, okay, nobody had actually already gone through the process of researching what education in distilling and brewing looks like in Australia, from the point of view of learning something from overseas. So really what I went through was it was still in some ways a bit of an academic process to get to the point where I could say, yeah, this is going to be a really good piece of work. And then once I was satisfied with that work, I got some people to check that logic was actually sound. And those people ended up being my referees. And then I put in an application. So I still did quite a lot of work, I think, up front to make sure that what I was going to put forward actually was robust and I could deliver, and would add lots of value. So yeah, I think certainly don't do half a job, I think, is probably or put your best foot forward is probably the advice I would give for that process.
Thank you, Anne. Next question relates to the kind of travel side and the logistics, I suppose, of that. Christine, this one might be one for you, but we've got a couple of questions along the lines of, can you break up the travel and do it in separate trips, in multiple trips, if that's better for your, your other obligations back home? And there's another question around.
Well, the short answer to that one is no, you can't.
And there's another question related to that, which is, are you able to juggle working remotely within your fellowship?
No, that's not the intention. These are, fully funded fellowships, and the expectation is that you will be fully engaged in the fellowship work. And look, the reason you can't break up the travel and do it in 2 chunks is, it's all very expensive and the trust is funding everything. And we are trying to manage the money for everyone, and we have to be fair and transparent.
Thank you very much. Liana and Anne, this is probably something we'd like to throw to you, maybe you, Anne, first, but there's a question around the application stage, having quite small character limits and being quite tight for information. So maybe, Anne, could you kick off, and then you, Liana, but how did you handle that?
That's a good question, isn't it? If you've got a tendency to be verbose, don't know. I'm really lucky because I've got a communications marketing background. So for me, actually, perhaps that wasn't so difficult. But I think, doing that front end work so that you're really clear what it is you want to do and what you want to deliver and what you want to say is probably the way to get around that.
Liana?
Yeah, I would agree with what Anne said there. I think that it can be concise sometimes, but then that forces you to really think about your project and what your focus is going to be.
Thank you. Multiple questions coming through around the interviews. Christine, are the interviews, how much flexibility is there around dates and doing things like remote video interviews if people are travelling for some other reason or otherwise unable to make a face-to-face interview? How much flexibility is there around that stage of the process?
Well, there's no flexibility around the dates, I'm afraid. The selection panels are made up of eminent people, and we have blocked out times in their diaries for the year. And so really the dates are the dates are the dates. Look, the expectation is that people will be there in person. I guess never say never, but online interviews are really on an exceptional basis only. And this is why we keep saying, make sure it's the right time for you. Make sure that you can, do what you need to do to be in the process as fully and give yourself the best chance of success as possible.
Okay. There's a question around someone wanting some tips in the 1-minute video part of the application process where it's a pitch. I would just say that there are some tips on the Churchill Trust website already, and there will be more information coming around that for this year's application process. Once applications open, which that date again, 28th of February, so not far away now. And of course, the closing date is 1 May. There was also some questions around how much feedback you get if you're unsuccessful and whether you need to adapt the process if you've been unsuccessful but you want to have another go. Liana, given your experience, this might be a great one for you to talk through. What was your experience with that specifically, being unsuccessful and then being successful?
Yeah, so I applied in, do you know what, in hindsight, it was a good thing. So I applied in 2020 and was unsuccessful that year, and all the travel then got put off from there. But when I then looked at, who had won that fellowship and their focus, I just knew that it just wasn't the right time for what I was doing. And I think I received an email just, saying that you're unsuccessful. There's obviously a high number of applicants. So, there's not, they can't go into a lot of feedback. And it just gave me time really to refine my thoughts and my project so that when I went in next year, I felt like my application itself was stronger because of that.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions on the reports as well. Actually, we've got a couple of questions just quickly on how many fellowships are awarded per year, I can just answer that one briefly now. That's about 100 every year. So we usually get many more applications than that. It's quite competitive, but yeah, it's around 100 a year. The other question we were going to go to next is around reports. So as Anne and Christine and Liana have all shared, there's you need to do a report following your travel. That's due on, I believe, 12 weeks after your return from travel. So that you can actually finish your fellowship travel and have a period of personal time overseas, and that won't count for that 12 weeks. The 12 weeks is on your return to Australia. But as far as the report goes, I think it's worth spending some time on this because it is a pretty essential part of it all. Christine, maybe could you kick us off by explaining what are the options for the report? Does it have to be written? Can it be other formats? And then Liana and Anne, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what that took, what that involved, because you've finished your travel, you're back home. What did you find in that experience? But yeah, Christine, you first.
Yeah, and look, from our point of view, it's a really key part of the process. Like it goes to the integrity of the fellowship, because people get very excited. They go and do the travel and they juggle everything, and then they can come back and tend to be exhausted. I will allow our fellows to either nod or disagree with that. And then you go, oh, geez, now I've got to write a report. And so we really encourage you when you're thinking about coming, it's not just about the travel. It's not just about writing your application and being interviewed. You have to have kind of the energy at the other end. That said, we'll try and help you. We've got a template. We do not want War and Peace. We do not want PhDs. We do not want things that are going to turn into a book. We do not want you to drive yourself completely around the twist doing it. And we do have some flexibility about accepting different formats and different comms channels for your reports. And we have some team members inside who will work with you on that. But I would like to really reinforce how important that we feel that is. And that's about the impact at the other end. Liana, Anne, you might have views.
Sure,
you go first. Yeah, you go first.
So yeah, totally agree. Look, I came back, so I did 7 weeks away. I came back on a Tuesday and I went back to work on Wednesday. So there was no downtime. It was straight back in, and that was exhausting. Like, to go back to full-time work when you've had this whole experience, it's a lot. Yeah, not gonna lie, it was a lot. I also needed time to really think about what I wanted to include, what I wanted to share, what I wanted to put in that report. Being a teacher, I wanted to really make it accessible for other teachers. So I really focused on sharing what my experience was and what I think that we can learn from that. So yeah, I read other reports and I thought, oh my gosh, they sound so academic. And I thought, you know what? For me as a teacher, I want to read something that I can relate to. So that's what I set out to write. I will also say I was incredibly lucky if you have somebody in your life that's willing to read it for you. So I had a friend who read that many drafts for me, and he said to me, like, how brutal do you want me to be? I was like, please be as brutal as possible, because I want it to be as good as it can possibly be. And he literally wrote on there, like, I don't know what you're talking about, don't understand, perhaps do this here, perhaps. And so, yeah, forever grateful. He is in my acknowledgements at the beginning, because he read countless scripts for me, so that, countless drafts, so that I could get it to a place that I was happy with it being published.
And I think my experience, again, when I think back to the application process, I knew that I wanted to produce a report like Liana's, which was very consumable and very readable, and arguably, hopefully, just a tiny bit fun as well. Because I was visiting distilleries, so people are going to be kind of a little bit fascinated by that anyway. But I knew right from the start that I needed to understand what I thought best practice would actually look like. So I had very clear questions which I asked, and they were the same questions that I asked all of the people that I visited, in a way which was actually probably a little bit maybe over structured, but what it gave to me was the ability to be able to compare apples with apples when I was writing my report. The other thing that I did is I agreed with myself that I wanted to have some fun while I was there. So I've got as I mentioned, I've got a comms background. So I took my GoPro with me. I interviewed everybody. I made what I called video postcards along the way, which I also then used for my social media. So that was also about building the kind of impact down the track after I came back. So I recorded them on my phone. I took GoPro videos, and I made notes. So I did lots really kind of at the time, because I knew when I came back, I'd kind of probably would all fall out of my head. So that's probably the other piece of advice I'd give people is, where you are comfortable doing it, take as much in terms of recordings or videos or notes that you can. I sent all my notes to the people I was visiting prior to going, so all my questions, and then I sent all of my notes to them afterwards to make sure I wasn't actually saying anything that they wouldn't be happy with. So I made sure I was quite structured about how I did my questions and my reports. The other thing that I did, Liana, I'm not sure whether you did the same thing, I left a day after each interview. So that allowed me to do my interview and then write up my notes. And that worked really well, except for the days where they said, oh, you should go to that distillery down the road. They're doing something really cool. You should go and see them. So that's probably the only time that I found actually I wasn't able to kind of capture it and kind of distill it to play on words there. Yes, but still, when I got back, I still, like Liana, I had to do more work than I thought that I would have to do to actually get the report done.
Just on that though, Anne, what would your advice be to people who might find themselves in that situation where they have notes that need to be typed up or written up, but there's also a really good opportunity that they've just been pointed to? How do you handle that?
Well, actually, my first piece of advice is to download Otter AI and do it that way. So record your interviews, get permission, record your interviews. It creates a transcript for you. So if you are like me, the sort of person who doesn't automatically remember stuff, get as many mechanisms as you can to capture the conversations you have. Yeah, and then, Tom, you're really talking about creating the report there, aren't you?
Maybe not going back to work the next day like Liana did, because you're already catching up on your life admin, right?
Yeah, I think that sounds a little crazy, actually, Liana. I don't know. Hats off to you for doing that. It sounds a
No
little bit
judgment.
crazy.
Do not recommend. Do not recommend.
Yeah, and I think if you can build some time into your life, if that's even possible when you get back, even if it's 3 hours or 2 hours on a Friday morning before work, there probably needs to be some structure as to how you do that to get it done, but you have to be wired to be able to do that too. Some people don't operate like that.
Thank you. Look, I think we've got time for maybe this possibly the last question, I suspect, but for Anne and Liana again, could you maybe just share a little bit of information briefly about the value of face-to-face versus digital engagement that you had? How did you find the contrast there? Maybe Liana, you first.
Sure. As in terms of when you go to places to visit people?
I think so, yeah. I think the
Yeah.
question is asking how much value do you get out of face-to-face versus...
Yeah. So all of mine were face-to-face. And for me, because it was classroom based, so a number of mine were going into classrooms and observing lessons. So for me, I wouldn't have wanted to do it any other way. If I was interviewing someone, I guess one-on-one, it would be different. But because of the nature of my project, I needed to be face-to-face. So it was invaluable. So once in a lifetime experience. So.
And I'm in the same of the same mind. Because the other thing we haven't talked about is the amazingness of, in my case, I landed in Belgium and I hopped on a bus and I drove to the place where I was going to be with my suitcase. The next day I went to these giant doors that were about 10 foot tall, and I tapped on the door and I walked into the first distillery of the people that I was meeting. And you get the other thing is that you capture the story of the people that you're meeting as well. So you don't just interview them, you're actually capturing what is their story, what is unique about their experience, what is, in my case, what is unique about their industry and their spirits they're producing. This distillery was a Middle Ages distillery that was built on a cloisters from the 10th century that was built on a Roman road, So there's no way on earth that you would actually get the background and have the depth of experience if you're not there, if you're not having that experience face to face. So, I mean, we've talked about all of the kind of reports and academic stuff, but the actual experience of being in those places is mind-blowingly interesting. So, yeah, face to face, 100%.
Terrific. Thank you, Anne. Look, I think we do have time for just one more question. And Christine, this one's for you. We've spoken a little bit earlier about the interviews and how much flexibility there is or is not with those interviews, but we've got a couple more questions coming through, I suppose, and this is just going to end on a practical note, but how should people approach it if they kind of know they're going to be out of their home state? Could be internationally or somewhere else, but if they know they're going to be out of their home state around that time, how should they think about this whole application process if given interviews are expected to be face-to-face?
Look, this is an information session, right? I am trying to encourage you to apply, but if you can't be face-to-face for an interview, is this the right year for you to be doing it? Like that's a legit question to be asking yourself. And really, it'll be up to the panel to decide if they accept something that's not face-to-face. So, and we have a round every year. It's just, given how competitive the process is, the value of the panel meeting you and hearing from you firsthand is so critical to you conveying that passion and purpose, and allowing the panel to really dig into that in a really human to human way. So I won't say that you wouldn't be able to be interviewed remotely, but I think it would be really on an exceptions basis. And if that's the case for you, 2026 might be a great year. I don't know.
Okay, that brings us to time. So
I feel like a downer to end on, Tom. I didn't mean it to.
I just wanted to squeeze as much in, so I thought we were ending on a practical note, but yeah, this is the kind of thing that people have to factor in when they're weighing it all up. So we wanted to get as much information to you as possible. And on that note, we're almost at time, but the recording will be shared with you via email, and it will also be on the Trust's YouTube page. I want to thank our guest speakers, Anne and Liana. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences with us. And yes, so remember that date, 28th of February, applications open. And if you have any information that you're looking for, the best place to go is churchilltrust.com.au. And we look forward to seeing plenty of amazing applications that are going to be future fellowships among the group that are here today. So thank you very much, and have a great afternoon and evening.
See y'all.
Bye.